Hello everyone, in this video series we will talk about Lightning Web Components. It is going to be an intuitive session where we will cover basic concepts around Lightning Web Components with demos. About me, I'm Avesh Singh. I'm a Salesforce consultant. I'm currently working in Accenture and I have around 9 years of experience in Salesforce. I'll start with course overview. In Chapter 1, we will introduce Lightning Web Components. In Chapter 2, we'll set up a playground where we can develop Lightning Web Components. In Chapter 3, we will work with Salesforce data. In Chapter 4, we'll talk about component communication and Aura interoperability. In Chapter 5, we will talk about security and how we can test Lightning Web Components. In this chapter, we will introduce Lightning Web Components. Lightning Web Component is a new programming model for building Lightning components. Previously, developers were using Aura framework for building Lightning components in Salesforce. Here the question arises why Salesforce has introduced a new framework to build Lightning components. To understand that, first we have to go to 2014 Web Stack. Before understanding the 2014 Web Stack, let us understand what is Web Stack. Web Stack is collection of elements required for web development. In the 2014 Web Stack, web standards only offered a limited foundation for the full stack that developers need to build large-scale web apps. Only ECMAScripts, events, standard elements, and rendering were available as a web standard. Key elements that developers needed were not the part of the web standard. To fulfill the gaps, different software vendors came with their own framework. Aura framework is one of such framework and others are Angular and React. Using such framework allowed developers to create large-scale web apps. Let us understand what is large-scale web apps. In simple terminology, large-scale web apps are the web apps with features like better in performance, scalable, distributed, and can deal with a large amount of data. Salesforce, Facebook are the best example of the large-scale web apps. In Salesforce, we can treat Lightning component as a basic element for building large-scale web apps. Well, changes are the part of life. Same is true with the technology and it evolves. We started with few kbs of internet speed and today we are getting GBs per second. Same way during last 5 years there are huge improvement in web stack. Let's see 2019 web stack. In 2019 web stack most of the features elements provided by the framework are now part of the modern web standards. We can see here web components, template, custom elements, shadow DOM modules, ECMAScripts, events, standard elements, and rendering are now part of the web standards. Only few are now provided by the framework such as UI components, specialized services, and data services. Let's compare 2014 web stack with 2019 web stack. In 2014 web stack, most of the key elements required for the development of components were part of the framework and only few were available as a web standard. While in 2019 web stack, most of the key elements required for the development of components are available as a web standard and only few are available as a framework. In 2014 web stack, components are not interoperable, means a component developed using one framework can't interoperate with a component developed using other framework. And the reason was most of the elements required for the development of these components were proprietary. For example, we can't take Angular component and bring it to Aura or vice versa. But in 2019 web stack, we have a common component model and most of the key elements are now part of the web standards that makes component interoperable. Now we can take the advantage of 2019 web stack and we can take an Angular component and bring it to Lightning Web Component or vice versa. In 2014 web stack, skills are not transferable. which means if you are a React developer, you are essentially a React language developer. You can't go tomorrow and start developing Aura component at day zero. While in 2019 web stack skills are transferable because we are pretty much working on web standards. In 2014 web stack, resources were hard to find because resources were working on a framework which has most of the proprietary key elements. Now in 2019 we have less proprietary key elements, so most of the developers are working on web standards, so it's easier for one developer to understand any framework. In 2014 web stack, framework abstractions are slow because your web engine has to understand your component, and for that purpose it has to download the JavaScript library, and then it has to parse it, then it has to compile it, then it has to split out the DOM objects and then CSS boxes, and then finally it renders your component, and all this is a synchronous process. In 2019 web stack, we get a better performance because most of the key elements are now part of web standard, which means they can directly understand by the web engine or your web browser. Now let's go back to Lightning Web Components. Lightning Web Component is based on 2019 Web Stack. All key elements are now part of the web standards, so no major lifting is required by the framework. Web engine can understand the code and there is no need of downloading and compiling the framework library by the web engine, which gives better performance. So in simple terms, Lightning Web Component is a new programming model for building Lightning components, and it leverages custom elements, templates, shadow DOM, decorators, modules, and other new language constructs available in ECMAScript 7 and beyond, and delivers unparalleled performance. Now let's talk about coexistence and interoperability. We can have Aura components and Lightning components on the same page. Aura components can include Lightning Web components, but a Lightning components cannot include Aura components. Aura components and Lightning components share the same base Lightning components and underlying services, such as Lightning Data Service User Interface API. With this, we come on end of this session. Thanks everyone. Please let me know if you have any questions, and you can find me at avishsingh172@gmail.com. Thank you so much, guys.